This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge those who are here today. I do see that we have Andrea Carrillo with Village of Benton, Mayor Becky Brewster with Town of Van Horn. We have Eric Zimmer, City Manager for Alpine, Carolyn Carlos, who is, I think, double hitting. She's both with the Culberson Allamore ISD as well as a council person for the Town of Van Horn. I do see Madison Schiller, Marcy Tuck with the City of Alpine. She is a great resource, everyone. Grant writer for Alpine, so I'm sure that she'll probably be able to show us or explain to us a few things here with fair housing that I just because she has a wealth of information. We've got Peggy O'Brien with us at the Council of Governments. And then I do see that we have Mr. Reed from Terlingua Community School District, Robert Halpert, who's with us at the Rio Grande Council of Governments doing economic development and workforce, Stephen Paulson with the Big Bend Sentinel, and then I do see Sam Shanzite, and he's also with us at the Council of Governments, also working on economic development and workforce. So I'll go ahead and get started. I see a few faces. So hi, Eric. Hi, Marcy. I see your faces. Let's see anyone else. Okay. All right. So the first thing that I want to tell you all is that we are going to talk about fair housing, and um, fair housing is not something that I am an expert in by any means. It's one of the deliverables that we're fulfilling under our agreement with the Texas Department of Agriculture. However, I do think that since we have a good group of folks here, as we're talking about the presentation, which is not going to be very long, maybe about 15 minutes to go through the slides, I do want to give us an opportunity to have a discussion amongst the group in terms of what are some things that you all are doing as a community for fair housing, and how is it that the Council of Governments can assist you with your fair housing requirements, if at all. And so before we get into that, though, what I do want to discuss, just for those who may not be aware briefly, to let you know about who we are as the Council of Governments. We are a voluntary association. We are comprised of local governments. We were established for the purpose of assisting local governments in planning for common needs, cooperating for mutual benefit, and for coordinating for sound regional development. When we talk about local governments, those are comprised of various organizations. They're primarily cities and counties within our service area, but we also have water districts, we have school districts, and we also have community colleges and Sul Ross University as an associate member of ours as well. And so we are recognized as a political subdivision under Chapter 391 of the Local Government Code through Texas statute. And so we are not a 501c3. Oftentimes people think that that's how we operate, but we do not file a 990 to the IRS at the end of the year. And but however, we do not levy any taxes. So that is a really big distinction that I did want to know. And then in terms of our service area that we cover, you can see the map here that's on the screen. And so as prescribed by the state of Texas, we have 6 counties that we're covering: El Paso, Hudspeth, Culberson, Jeff Davis, Brewster, and Presidio. However, we are very lucky to have Doña Ana County and Las Cruces remain members of the organization. They do see the networking opportunities that are available to them through the Council of Governments, as well as some other resources that they can tap into. And so they are also member governments of ours. So we're one of 2 councils of governments in the state of Texas that has membership outside of the state. And so we are also, just to note, we do have 30 member governments that are part of our association, and that's going to be broken down into 7 counties, 1 tribal nation, which is the Isleta del Sur Pueblo. We have 14 cities, 3 school districts, and then we also have 5 special districts. And then in terms of what we do, so I wanted to let you all know these are some of the programs that we administer here at the Council of Governments. I think many of you are familiar with our 911 program because we operate that on behalf of our 5 counties outside of El Paso. And if anybody is in need of a physical address, they come to the council governments for that. And so I think that is one way where we're able to have the public have a direct connection with us in terms of what it is that we do. We're also managing the aging program. And so that has become really front and center for us, especially with COVID and the vaccination rollout, ensuring that we're assisting our communities in having our 65 plus population be considered for the vaccination since they're part of the 1B group. We also take care of solid waste. We do offer small, modest grants for cities and counties and school districts, and those funds have been used primarily for cleanups, and recycling as well. We have emergency preparedness, law enforcement, community development, economic development. We also operate the El Paso County Dispute Resolution Center, which is something that we've done since 1987. And then also we have been managing the water planning group on behalf of Water Development Board since its inception as well. We have had the opportunity to work to have a partnership with the Workforce Solutions Borderplex, where we serve as a contractor to them and serve as a liaison on their behalf with our region. And then finally, we are just now getting into flood planning, which is another program that's being operated by the Water Development Board, which we're managing on behalf of the Upper Rio Grande region. And so today, what I do want to discuss with you again is fair housing. And just to explain to you why this has come about, we have a contract with the Texas Department of Agriculture through the direction of Suzanne Bernard, who's their director. And one of the deliverables that we are tasked with is providing fair housing initiatives. And so you can see these 3 bullets here. These were the 3 options that we had to fulfill our deliverable. And so one included having an event to promote Fair Housing Month or Community Development Week in April. We also could have a housing fair or any other event to assist grant recipient communities in meeting their fair housing obligations. And so the last one is inviting elected officials or media, as well as media, to observe any Texas CDBG funded projects that have made an impact on the community. And so I thought that at this point in time, the most straightforward approach that we could take would be bullet number 2. And so that's why we wanted to have this presentation for you all and just start the discussion about fair housing to see where everyone is at with this requirement, to see again how we can be of assistance. And one thing to note, just to throw out there for everyone, everyone's attention, is that we are, for those of you who are looking at applying to the Texas Department of Agriculture, that those applications, I believe, will be due in May of 2021. And if any of you are looking at applying, if you can do some work on the front end by the month of February, you will receive additional points for your application. And so if any of you are in need of assistance in terms of getting that information, please reach out to me. I can get that to you. And also just remember that the way that the scoring is assessed now, if any of you have not applied for a CDBG project in several cycles, you will already have a leg up in terms of the scoring, because they're looking at assessing points for those who have not received funding, I believe, in the last 2 cycles. So I'll get that information out to you as well, but just to be looking out for that. Okay, so let's go into fair housing. These are the topics that I'm going to cover. What does fair housing mean? And then also what is the definition of what you would consider available housing to be, and what has to go under that term? And then also, what is accessible housing? And then finally, what can my community do to support fair housing? So we'll go ahead and get into the topic now. Before I do, I just wanted to make just put a disclaimer out. This information that I was able to gather comes from the North Central Texas Council of Governments, based in Dallas, and so in Arlington, I should say. They do. It's an 8-page document. It's primarily it was it was created primarily for elected officials. So that might be something that you all would want to take a look at in terms of providing that to your city council or commissioner's court. It is something that they put together in 2014. So there might be some items that we would want to update, but I think that it's a really great starting point for elected officials to understand what their responsibilities are when it comes to fair housing. And so when we say fair housing, that's referring to the practices that we need to comply with the Federal Housing Act, which was passed in 1968 under President Johnson. And all other laws and executive orders that have come into place since that time are applicable to the Fair Housing Act. And so in a nutshell, the Fair Housing Act, as amended, prohibits discrimination in housing and related transactions on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, religion, disability, whether that be physical or mental, familial status, and that would mean that if there's the presence or anticipated presence of children that are under 18 in the home. And so everyone is protected under any of these 7 categories in terms of fair housing. And so there are many housing related transactions that are covered under the Act. And here are just a few to note so you can be aware of. That includes rentals, home sales, mortgage lending, homeowners insurance, home improvement, as well as zoning. As I said, most housing is covered, but in some circumstances, the Fair Housing Act exempts owner-occupied buildings with no more than 4 units, or single-family housing that's sold or rented without the use of a broker, and housing operated by organizations and private clubs that limit occupancy to members. And so in our area, I would venture to guess that there's quite a bit of this going on in terms of apartments that are no more than 4 units, or homes that are being rented without the use of a broker. And so I just wanted to note that it may be difficult to implement some of these fair housing practices if these populations are exempt under the Act itself. And so we can have a discussion on that after the presentation. And so these are some of the items that the Fair Housing Act protects against. And so some of these seem very straightforward, others are a bit more subtle. And so just wanted to highlight those to you. So the first one includes you are not allowed to refuse to sell or rent. So if you refuse to negotiate for housing or you're making the housing unavailable or deny a dwelling, that is illegal. You're also, in terms of discrimination, in terms of conditions or privileges of sale. And so some examples of that include that even though this type of activity is not as overt as refusing to sell or rent, it might be more subtle. So some examples include an apartment manager that may require a higher security deposit from a family because they have children, or you may demand an extraordinarily high. Ooh, let's see here. I think we have 2 people. Somebody might be, yeah. Let's see. We'll see if we can do it without that happening again. I think sometimes that happens when someone's on the computer and on the phone. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so then talking about, again, the discrimination. So you could also, another example of this type of discrimination may include, asking for a high application fee for minority applicants. So these kinds of actions are considered illegal. And then the other one, the third one, as you can see here, advertising. So it's illegal to advertise or make any statement that indicates a limitation of preference based on color, race, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, or handicap. And I know that this probably seems so straightforward and common sense, but if you had something like, prefer older adults without children, that in itself would be considered illegal. So those kinds of things are important to be aware of, because whether you are intentionally or unintentionally um, performing this action, it's against the law. And so the next one is denying availability. And so that means an example for that would be also where a real estate agent or apartment manager they're not allowed to falsely claim that there's a lack of available properties if there are, in fact, properties that are available to rent or sell. And so, again, because if you're in any one of those 7 protected classes, that's not allowed. This one here was something that I was not as familiar with in terms of the wording. We've got blockbusting and staring. And so for blockbusting, this is an effort to induce panic. And so the example that they give is that if let's just say you're in a neighborhood and you're telling all the white homeowners that other white families are leaving the area and that minorities are moving in. And you do this all with the goal of having these homeowners sell their homes at an unusually low price. Steering, on the other hand, means that a real estate agent may be inclined to show white clients' homes in predominantly white neighborhoods, or vice versa, where minority client homes, where they're showing minorities homes that are only in minority dominant areas. And so again, steering, those types of things, I think in some instances, some overt, some subtle, those as well are illegal. And then the big one, which I think that sometimes it's hard for us to wrap our hands around, is just the failure to make reasonable accommodation. And so if you are renting, specifically with renting, if you have someone who is associated with a physical or mental disability, you cannot, as a landlord, refuse to let them make accommodations to their dwelling at their own expense if it's necessary for them to make those accommodations. You also cannot refuse to make reasonable accommodations in your rules or practices or services that are necessary for the handicapped person to use your facility. And so one example that they give, which at this point in time I think seems pretty straightforward, if you have a no pet policy, but this person who's visually impaired needs a service dog, you are not allowed to tell them that they cannot bring their service dog in, because then again you would be violating the Fair Housing Act. And then the last one is lending discrimination and redlining. And so what this entails is that there can be discrimination in making loans for the purpose of real estate transactions. That's considered illegal. So real estate transactions include purchasing, constructing, improving, repairing, or maintaining a dwelling. And so the 7 categories that we covered under the Act, you cannot, any of those protected classes, you cannot refuse to make a mortgage loan to them, or refuse to provide information regarding loans, or impose different terms or conditions of that loan. Also discriminating against, there's no discrimination in appraising the property. And then you cannot set different terms or conditions for the purchasing of those loans. So those again are just some of the actions that are not allowed under the Act for this protected class under fair housing. And so when we talk about accessible housing, accessible housing is designed to accommodate persons with disabilities. And the FAIR Act sets certain requirements for accessible design and new construction to make sure that the housing is accessible to those persons with disabilities. And so 2 of the items that are covered under accessible housing include multifamily dwellings that have been built for first occupancy after 1991. Those have to include certain features of accessible design. And then for those that are covered, multifamily dwellings, which are buildings consisting of 4 or more dwelling units. These include apartments, condominiums, single-story townhouses, vacation time-sharing properties, homeless shelters, and other similar residential buildings. So examples of buildings that are not covered include detached single-family houses, duplexes or triplexes, or multi-story townhouses that do not have elevators. And so when we talk about fair housing and we're thinking about who has to comply with the law, here are some of the most more obvious participants who have to ensure that they're complying with the law. That includes your architects, your builders, your building contractors, your site engineers, and then the last one is just a lump of many people who are going to be involved in the design and the construction of the residential housing. So coming towards the end of this presentation, we start to think about, well, as cities and counties, what is it that we are supposed to do, or how can we do this? What can we do to ensure that there is support for fair housing, and how can we assist in that effort? And so this document has provided some items for consideration as cities and counties that you can do as housing authorities that you can also undertake. And so those include the first one would include assessing the status of fair housing in your community. And so you could conduct a community-wide housing analysis to determine the impediments to fair housing. You can meet with your area realtors, neighborhood advocacy groups, talk to your planning and zoning commissions, as well as the renters and buyers in identifying how you can eliminate those impediments. The second one includes implementing a fair housing ordinance or other measures if you haven't done so already. And so based on the assessment that you take on your community, you could pass a fair housing ordinance that also contains a penalty clause. And so in this document that I can send out to you all, they do include a sample fair housing ordinance that you all could consider if you wanted to. And then just also to note, if you do have a fair housing ordinance that was passed before 1988, you may want to review that ordinance to ensure that all of the new federally protected classes have also been included in that ordinance itself. Under educating the community, this is where we could publicize the existence of the ordinance, and we can do that through our social media, through our inserts with our water or electricity or gas bills. We could also look at considering conducting a workshop to talk about housing opportunities, as well as talking about available funding for housing. So TDHCA has several first-time homebuyers program. That's something that you all may want to take a look at, or you have the home program itself, which is something that does the same, provides the same format in terms of lending. And so those are some of the things that you could perhaps take a look at in terms of how you would want to educate your community. And then number 4 goes hand in hand with number 2. If you already have a fair housing ordinance, well, then you want to start enforcing it. And I know that just like everything else in life, sometimes that's hard to do. Once you create the rule, now you have to adhere to it. So that's something that you would want to maybe take a look at to see if that is being enforced. And then also you would want to maybe take a look at also seeing if you have a fair housing officer that you've assigned, so that way they could investigate any potential discrimination complaints. And then the last one is encourage your brokers to sign the Fair Lending Best Practices Agreement. This is a voluntary agreement. It is more of an offer. You should offer it up as an opportunity for lenders to incorporate fair housing and equal opportunity principles into their mortgage lending standards, and as well as increase low income and minority lending. And so these companies and associations that have signed these agreements, not only are they going to commit to their responsibilities under the Fair Housing Act, but it also will assist in making a serious effort to exceed those requirements. And so those are some examples of what you can do as a community to support fair housing. And I know that this presentation was, like I said, very, very short and brief, but I know that many of you are aware of what fair housing is and how you need to accomplish that, but I really wanted to have an opportunity for us to talk and see what, again, what are some best practices that you've already implemented that you can share with others in the group? Or if you're in need of that, let's see how it is that we can assist each other in making sure that we fulfill the needs of fair housing. And then the final thing is that with fair housing coming up in the month of April, if there's anything that you all would like to do in a coordinated way to promote that, please let me know so we can see if we can get that going for you and we can implement an event that can coincide with Fair Housing Month. So I'm going to open it up. So if you all want to take yourselves off of mute, and if anybody wants to start the discussion before I just go off and ask you point blank to make a comment, does anybody have any questions, concerns, comments?
Hey, Annette, this is Eric. I'll start off.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and appreciate the time that you and your team have taken with Marcy and some of the others here in Alpine. Because housing is a major issue, not just in Alpine, but Marfa, Fort Davis. I mean, we're all experiencing these same things, and so layering on adherence and oversight to fair housing practice is certainly important from our perspective. Just kind of wondering from your seat in El Paso and looking at from the COG perspective, what deficiencies, number one, do you see at a high level across the region? And then number two is, some of the overarching housing crisis that we're facing here within Brewster, Jeff Davis, and Presidio counties, is that, pervasive across the region? And then there's some other steps, because what I'm worried about is that we get very aggressive putting housing in, and then some of these steps certainly could be missed without proper oversight. I had a call earlier today with an individual who's trying to do construction in Alpine, and they're upset because we're holding their project to the code that was adopted, the International Building Code, which to me has layers of fair housing, especially on the accessibility side, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can you speak a little bit just about, regionally some of what you're seeing, and are there some of the overarching issues that maybe we should be focused on independently within our communities?
Well, I think that, and I see that Andrea's on the call as well, so she maybe can give us a perspective from El Paso County within a smaller community, what obstacles they're facing. But I think that again, it's very different from what if you look at the El Paso Housing Task Force, what are they dealing with versus what the rest of us would be dealing with in the region, are so different from one another. But I think that so if I focus on our 5 counties, I think that it's so difficult to get anything going because you have to adhere to all of these standards, and so there's not a united front in terms of how you're going to deal with it, and so there are a lot of missed opportunities for fair housing, I think, and housing that's going to be available for all incomes. And so I think that what you all are encountering, I think, can be kind of almost the lead for the rest of the communities in terms of how you're dealing with it. And so what we can definitely do is I can provide you all with some previous agendas, just the minutes from the Housing Task Force, because if we see that there's some topics that they're discussing that would lend themselves really well to your conversation, I definitely would like to lean on them to see if we can get some assistance in terms of how they've been able to deal with it, if they have it all.
Yeah, because part of the other thing, and I appreciate you doing that, Annette, because part of the other thing I think about is, are there some strategies that larger communities are using to create pockets or zones where affordable fair housing can be achieved, smaller footprint type homes, things of that, which traditionally, you move to far West Texas and you like the expanse and the openness and you don't want a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot lot. But the fact of the matter is, having smaller footprint lots, smaller footprint homes allows for the economics to be achieved, and which I think helps across all spectrums some of the racial inequalities that we experience, income challenges. And so if there's something that maybe a task force in El Paso has put together that seems very relevant, we certainly would love to explore and look at that a little bit more in depth.
Oh, definitely. And I think that, as I was preparing this, and like I said, this is not the most timely information. It was put together in 2014, but I've been following you all, both communities in terms of, the Airbnbs and, those types of properties. And is there anything that's supposed to be further explored for accommodations there? And so like, I think that there's so many opportunities in terms of who is responsible and how that could be trickled down to ultimately saying it was you, City of Alpine, that should have done A, B, or C. Those are, I think, those are huge implications that you all are undertaking. And so if we can just have that conversation just to even hear about what are your major concerns, and that way we can get you, as the council governs, we can get you all the experts in terms of being able to maneuver through that. I know that like with Peggy and Sam and Robert, what they've done is as of now, they've manned up a broadband committee to talk about that as a region. And so we've collectively gotten various people together to try to have this discussion at least on a monthly basis, if not bi-weekly. But if housing is another concern as a region that we would like to have a committee stand up for, so we can talk about best practices, that's something else that we can do as well.
Yeah, and my inclination is that from Alpine, I mean, certainly housing is a much bigger issue than broadband connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that, more and more people are working online, et cetera, but, we've got a cable provider, we've got 2 WISP providers, we've got a telecom provider. We've got fiber throughout the community. We're pretty broadband rich. Now, certainly you get South County, it's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
But housing and just, we're not seeing the economic expansion that I think we could experience because there's just not good, fair, affordable housing. So if you can stand up a committee, that certainly would be worthwhile. And we certainly would have somebody from the city, either Marcy or myself, sit on that and participate as well.
Well, that'd be great. I mean, we could definitely engage with TDHCA and Texas Department of Agriculture. And then, so one thing that I do want to note, just so you all are aware of, it's going to be, we're looking at February the 23rd. It would be 8:30 Mountain Time, 9:30 Central. The Economic Development Administration is looking at putting together a panel for us to talk about, to have various federal agencies available to us to talk about their programs. And I know that HUD will be one of them. And so I'm just remembering that definitely I can ask them to be really narrow with their presentation in terms of affordable, fair housing being the topic. And so I'll be sure to reach out to Mr. Pache and tell him that that's something that we would want to have a discussion on.
Okay. Thank you, Annette. I know I'm only
Thank you.
one of 12 on the call, and I'm sorry for monopolizing so many questions.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We need somebody to start it off. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. And I see Marcy, you have your microphone on. Would you like to say anything?
Yes, I kind of wanted to follow up with what Eric was saying and dig a little deeper into the weeds. I wanted to clarify, Annette, if your understanding of fair housing is actually different. It's sort of fair housing versus affordable housing. They really are 2 different sort of legal constructs, legal terms, legal avenues for housing. I think what Alpine struggles with is affordable housing in the exactly what Eric was saying, sort of a smaller footprint, but your own sort of single family home. I think, and I'm not 100% sure, that's why I'm asking for clarification, that fair housing typically is more of your kind of Section 8 multifamily unit dwellings. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And so when and this I had the same conversation with Peggy when I told her that I was going to put this together. The initial thought was affordable housing, but to ensure that I'm checking off the box with my deliverables and TDA, they really want us to focus on fair housing. But I think that when you have the affordable housing, that component of fair housing is going to be included, right? Because you want to make sure that you're doing everything as appropriate by the law. So I think that when we talk about, if we were to man up this committee, it's completely appropriate to have it focused on affordable housing, but just knowing that there's that element of fair housing involved in it to ensure that we're not putting our local governments in any sort of liability with any initiative that you all are starting where your name might be on this one development, so to speak, and we want to make sure that you're adhering to the fair housing practices as well.
Can you go back to a slide that, on that note, can you go back to the slide that described and sort of, maybe I read it wrong, but that it excluded fourplexes and townhomes?
Yeah, this one here. And so
because truthfully, I mean, that's kind of what out here I think we would honestly almost like to see, is that type of less dense affordable housing.
And I think that that kind of came back. I did make that comment that it may not pertain to our region because we don't have them in that kind of setting. So you may not have to, if these are built out, you're not having to adhere to the Fair Housing Act. But I know that you would probably aspire to, as long as there's not any huge impediments that are going to be in your way to endorse those kinds of developments. But you're right. I mean, the way that I understand it and what I took from that information on the document, that those are excluded. But we can take a deeper dive on that just to make sure that there's nothing that's being missed in terms of what you're responsible and what's not going to be covered under the act.
I think the biggest downfall for that is that if you aren't building with 4 or more dwelling units per building, you possibly aren't getting the funding associated with TDHCA. I mean, that's the biggest downside. So I think the struggle would be to find the funding with more of the townhome or duplex or single story or single family units, smaller single family units.
Well, I think that right there would be one of the charges that you can provide to us, the council of governments, in terms of the research, because we can,
you guys to provide it to us.
Yeah,
I don't know
definitely.
What it is.
Well, but I think that we can definitely, that this is not something we could definitely have TDHCA come on board. We can talk to them about the programs that they're offering. I know that Becky Brewster was on the call. She had to drop off, but she, serving as a grant administrator, has a lot of expertise in the home program. And so I think that's one of the things that we need to, maybe that's the thing, would be really strategic, right? Really strategic with which applications you want to go after. So like if you wanted to go after the marketing tax credit, maybe that's not the best fit for our region, because we're not going to be building out 20 units because that's not ideal for our region. And so just making sure that we spend our time in the right places to maximize the funding potential.
I think that the panel that you described that's coming up in February, I think that sounds incredibly helpful. If you're pulling, other, like the home program is there to talk about what they can do, which I believe is more single family. But just, you're right, the different pots of money that might fit the housing assessments and our housing, our individual community housing needs the best.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So I think I'm looking forward to that one. That one looks incredibly helpful.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead.
They couldn't have come along without his knowledge and his contacts.
I'm not sure who that is. Is that okay? Well, Sam, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I just wanted to comment that, like, I do think that it's sort of easier to see out here the need for like single family housing additions on smaller lots and casitas and grandmothers' dwellings. But I also think that if we're really, I think that in some ways we can think beyond that, if we're really thinking about economic development and fair housing and going beyond sort of like what we feel is the acceptable like architectural typology for our communities, which up until now has been single family housing. But if we're thinking about like that we want to grow our communities in, I don't know, perhaps more substantial ways that provides housing that's much cheaper for people to use, that like maybe some of these guidelines are useful in sort of reimagining what, you know, what a denser small town looks like that can act. I mean, there's the reason that single family homes may not be on this list is because they're like not as efficient in housing people. So I think like, I don't know, I would caution against sort of like thinking that we can't, I don't know, have these larger dwellings and that we can't expand in that way and that those things don't belong here. Because I think that like, in fact, perhaps they do. And I don't know, I think we can sort of think bigger. That's all I was saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we would like to see, you know, tiny homes included as an option, like a tiny home community, which is still single family, just much smaller.
And
So-
I think one of the things that what I wanted to ask to you all, the group, is that I've, you know, since my time here at the Council of Governments, I have not been able to see an opportunity where a project that was on paper was able to go all the way to construction, that was sponsored by a city. And that's maybe just because that's just my ignorance and knowing that actually went forward. But I guess maybe Eric, can you talk a little bit about what have been some of the biggest obstacles that you all have encountered when you have developers coming to you saying that they want to partner with the city in developing affordable housing?
You know, the biggest challenge that any developer builder has, well, there are two challenges. Number one, we had a group in 2015 out of Wisconsin that had done a couple projects in the region, and they were going after those housing credits. And the perception in the community was that they were going to build low income housing, and drug people and violent people were going to live there. And so the segment of town that had been picked out had multiple people. From my perspective, they were underinformed, and somebody had plugged fear in their ear, and they ran with it, and it died on the vine. So that was one element. I think the other piece that we're challenged with is having access to vendors that can construct at a reasonable cost. And so a lot of these folks, quite simply, that can build affordable type housing, they want to be within 30 miles of a city like in El Paso, San Angelo, Austin, because they get a better bid pool, and they've got to make money too. I mean, I'm certainly not opposed to that, but when your cost of qualified constructors is 30% higher in a small town, it makes it tough for them to even want to try to go after those projects. And so, you know, those have been the two biggest impediments, I think, that, you know, community like Alpine has seen. And some of that comes down to, can we get creative and look at, you know, smaller footprint, you know, even more aggressive funding at the state level, at the federal level, if you're X amount of miles from a major metro area, because we know that's an impediment, right? So if you're north of 100 miles from a major metro, you just conceivably don't get workers to come in and work every day. They're going to be remote on site, and that significantly drives up your cost. Plus, the delivery of goods, the shipping cost comes, or trucking cost comes a little bit more premium too. So those are things that certainly with this panel, maybe, you know, we could discuss, especially for the west half of Texas.
Okay, thank you for that. Peggy, were you going to say something?
Hi, yes. It's nice to see both Eric and Marcy. I've never seen you in person, well, your faces before. So before I came to this region, I was involved in affordable housing. And, you know, just as you say, Eric, there's so many hurdles, land being the first one. And I know that a lot of it turned into private and donation and 501c3s to be able to forward the initiatives, land leases, you know, using condo law, that sort of thing. And when I was at the city of Marfa, they did start a committee, and I will check back with them to see what sort of progress they've made, because there are different models, like what you were talking about, Marcy, having smaller footprint abodes, you know, still having independent living, but having it be clustered together. And I know that in different states, like outside of Boulder, there was one where there's some Section 8, there's some affordable, and then it's sliding scale, you know, and so there are more, I think, creative collaborations that are happening. I know in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, there are some, but it's initially a very heavy lift. And, you know, maybe this would be a great working group to do, Annette, like you suggested, a tri-county one. I don't know if, no, there's no one from Presidio on the call. I'm just wondering if there's anything down there happening, but that could be definitely a working group that we can get together. I would be very interested in that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I wonder if how many examples we can see, if at all, if we were to look at, you know, when you have a housing development corporation, what does that actually mean? What is it that they can do? But if you're a 501, and let's say that, like where Eric is talking about, that they need to make money, well, as a nonprofit, then if you can just break even, that's the whole idea of having a nonprofit. And so I wonder if and when, at least for sure, the Tri-County, because again, just because of the proximity with you all, if that would be enough to generate the possibility of that kind of creation, where you could have the employees that were skilled or can be, because this can become a workforce issue where we could engage Workforce Solutions Boardplex in terms of the training that's needed to teach the builders what they need to know to be able to build out these homes or multi-family dwellings, things of that nature. So let me ask real quick, since I have some others on the line, if you feel comfortable, I'm just going to throw out a few names here. So like Reagan with Terlingua, I'm going to venture to guess that maybe you all, as the school district, maybe you all are kind of the de facto housing developer for the region, if that's something that's a need of your area. Is that a fair statement?
It is, and I joined the call just to kind of get some information out to our parents if we needed it as well. But I'm also on the board of Terlingua Fire and EMS, and what we're noticing in South County, I think Eric referred to it, is just access to housing. And because what used to be rentals in South Brewster County are now typically nightly rentals, and so when we're recruiting either medics or teachers, it's a big issue. I'll echo it with Eric. It's a bigger issue than broadband or connectivity. You know, it's we've kind of created a small solution here at school with RV hookups, but you know, for anyone, they're going to have to get land and they're going to have to build, and then we've got the same problem they do in Alpine, which construction costs are pretty high. So I was mainly here just to learn some things, but that's our experience here down south.
Okay, well, and I think that that might be another item that we need to take a look into, just in terms of seeing if there's other models that we can look at for school districts, if you all are serving in that capacity. That's something that we need to pose to TDHCA to see if perhaps what's allowed for a district to operate in that way, and if you're purchasing land or there's state lands. I don't know. It can go so many different ways, but it seems like with our much smaller communities, that's probably going to fall in your hands as well, especially because you're trying to recruit. So that can be on our list as well in terms of topics we can discuss. And so Caroline, with Van Horn, I think that obviously with Blue Origin coming into play, I would think that, and then also the gas exploration, that has kind of been the boom for Van Horn. But what are some things that you all are experiencing out there?
Absolutely. It looks like Becky and Mayor Brewster also just joined on the call again. Right now we just finished a big 48 unit apartment complex build for different Blue Origin employees. And so they seem to be more interested in sort of 1 bedroom, 1 bath types of housing. So that was a good option for us, just to create that kind of density with apartments. I would say one of them, Becky, you can confirm or deny, I think one of the issues that we face is also builders being able to get bonded and get their performance bonding requirements out here. And so if there are workshops that we could develop to sort of help, some of our local builders or builders that we're training through the Workforce Solutions navigate that process, I think that's certainly a big need for our city and for our school to feel like they can trust the builders that are working with them. Becky, do you have anything to add?
There she is. Becky, you're on mute in case you're wanting to unmute yourself. Okay, we'll come back. Oh, there she is. Becky? Mayor Brewster, I should say. Maybe she's having some audio difficulty.
Issues, but I think I would speak for the whole town of Van Horn to say that we would be very interested in participating in any kind of working group. I know that we're not, directly in the tri-counties, but we face all of the same issues that you guys are talking about, with the exception of the Airbnb issue, unfortunately.
And let me ask you, so Caroline, with the builders that you were talking about, are they coming mostly from the El Paso area, or?
So some of our local builders, what kind of prevents us from working with many of our local builders is that they can't get the performance bonding for a certain project. So that pushes us to start, looking at El Paso builders. And we'd ideally like to sort of be able to put that money in the pockets of our local builders. So I think that sort of additional workshops, additional outreach that we can do, I think will only benefit. And also if our local builders too know what types of projects are available to them at Marfa and Alpine, I know they would be interested in kind of increasing the scope of their work sites and helping their towns out.
Great. And so, like with that 48 unit, is that in the city limits of Van Horn, or is that outside?
Yes, it's right on our Broadway. And so, that builder came from El Paso, got financing actually from a developer locally. And they basically, sort of what was helpful for that builder is that they opted into a 10-year lease agreement with Blue Origin, so that those they can guarantee that all 48 units are going to be leased out for the next 10 years. And so that was something that we found to be, just to give the assurance to the builder that this was something that was an investment well made. And so that was a kind of private deal struck between the company and that builder. But we're certainly very glad to have those 48 units, certainly. It's maybe the first apartment project that we've seen in Van Horn, a large scale apartment project, and it's just all one story, 1 bedroom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest unit I think any of us in the 5 counties could. I don't know if I can compare that to any other unit in within our 5 counties. So yeah, that's something you see. If I keep saying if and when we can get out, I would definitely like to take a look at that. That'd be great.
Yes, we'd love to show you them. Absolutely.
Thank you. And so Andrea, with Village of Vinton, so the Village of Vinton has been having it's been a number of years now, water issues where they were having to get water connected through the El Paso Public Service Board, since everybody was on, most residents were on private wells. And so it's been a huge endeavor, and it's been a huge impediment to any sort of development, whether that be residential or commercial. But Andrea, do you want to tell us how things are going in Vinton?
Hi, sure, of course. So for the good news, we are actually through the construction of the water and wastewater. We're already under phase 1. So that's really good. And as you mentioned before, that was one of the biggest impediments to get development here, especially commercial. As far as housing, since it's a small community, most of it's comprised of family of many generations. So we have a lot of families that just pass their properties along other generations. I guess the one of the struggles that we've had is having or bringing in the new community members, just because of the lack of the developments. We have a lot of still mobile homes. We have a couple of mobile home parks. And we also passed in around 2019 our Unified Development Code would put a little bit more restrictions on and rules and regulations on housing, especially on mobile homes. So a lot of the building requests or permits that we got here were for mobile homes wanting to come here. So by the village being a little bit more stringent on the regulations on that, that wasn't very well taken within the community. But now that we have water and sewer really close on its way, ready to start getting connections, we've had new developments on both single family and multi-housing interested here. We do have an apartment complex that it's low income, that it was completed around 2018, 2019. And just as Mr. Zimmer, we had the same reaction for the community, where they thought that because it was low income housing, it was going to be an issue or a problematic in the community. We were able to clarify that. The contractor was very nice on having public meetings, public hearings to explain to the community and to the council members also what really low income or low housing means. We actually are starting the process in getting another development similar to that, with apartments and also single family complex. Around 2017, 18, we annexed some acres outside our city limits that are intended also, as soon as the water lines are ready, to be single family units. So just being able to have this infrastructure has brought in a lot of opportunities to the community. As far as housing, and we're looking into all being affordable housing, and being able to provide those opportunities to the community, other than the options that we have right now. That's either getting your lot, building from bottom up, or getting a mobile home and bring it in.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, that's exciting news to hear about what's been able to happen with the water. So I guess it's one of those build it, they will come, and they have been coming. So that's great. Thank you, Andrea. I do see, I see Melissa Henderson, I see Madison and Stephen. Do you all have any questions or comments that you would like to make at this time? Madison, Stephen?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you first. I'm just here to listen. So yeah,
I'm in the same boat. I'm sitting in for Robert, my director, because he's having to attend Commissioner's Court today. So I'm learning a lot, though.
Okay, great. Well, I guess one thing I do want to ask you all as a group is, do you do any event for Fair Housing or Community Development Week? I know that if you get those CDBG dollars as an entitlement community, you have to. So you see all of that hurrah that's going on here in El Paso because, you know, they're required to, but they do a really good job with that. But do you all do anything in April to commemorate fair housing? Eric, Andrea, or Mayor Brewster?
Hi, this is Andrea. As far as Vinton, we do not. I remember that maybe around 2014, 2015, we did have some CDBG funding, and I remember that the village used to do some sort of publications and stuff like that. I was barely new at that time, so I'm not sure what it entitled, but I do remember back then the current administrator used to do it. But since we do not have housing funding around maybe 2016, 2017, we have not taken part in any events.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Is that the same for you, Eric?
That's correct. We don't.
Okay.
We don't have an annual event of that nature. I mean, we might do a proclamation at a council meeting, but that's about it.
Okay, and then how about you, Mayor Brewster? Anything with Van Horn? Oh, that's right. She's muted. She can't. Caroline, what do you think?
She's going to be referring to. Yes, we do, similar to Eric and Alpine, we do a proclamation with our city council as part of our CBDG grant, but nothing more robust than that.
Okay, so then, I asked this because, so in terms of where we put our efforts or energy, when I mentioned in the slides, I think that we don't need to focus on Fair Housing Month, April. That's not where we need to be because you all are not participants of that. And so we should focus on these events where we're doing them throughout the year just to bring in experts so we can have these discussions and get some, hopefully some pointed answers to help move things along for your communities. Robert Halpern, you were going to say something. I forgot to ask. I saw that you had your mic on. Did you want to say anything? Oh, yeah, go ahead and turn that on.
Well, I guess I'm getting late in the conversation, but of course, the conversation seemed to have mutated into sort of affordable housing in addition to fair housing. But this was discussed before. I mean, kind of the path of least resistance that no one likes to talk about are manufactured homes. And of course, there's zoning for that and everything. But in terms of creating more availability, you know, there are manufactured homes that could solve some of this problem fairly immediately, but it comes with the stigma. Of course, there are parts of towns that they're not zoned, or if you want to put one in, you have to get a variance, but that's like already a solution that's here. And in fact, there is a provider in Presidio and Ojinaga. So the question becomes of how quickly do you want to fix affordable housing, and do you want to consider manufactured homes or trailer homes for another nomenclature? But that's already here, and they're probably, you know, there's a shorter life expectancy than stick and brick, but when taken care of, they can last a long time, and it's in an affordable entree, the most affordable entree, it seems, than to build site building. And as we all know, the costs out here have increased exponentially over the last 20 years.
And I think that would be another impediment too in terms of the financing. And it's been some time since I've worked with anybody in that realm, but I know that some of the issues they were having was that these lenders were perhaps not, at times were almost predatory in terms of the financing and the interest rates. And so that's something else that we would have to take a look at. So I think, so we're coming up to the hour, but what I wanted to ask you all is that if this is something that we could engage in further in terms of the topics that we identified, is this something that you all would like to have once a month in terms of having a gathering to talk about? And obviously it would be more structured. We'd have our agenda to talk about those specific items, and we could bring on an expert. Or do you want to do maybe every 2 months? What's the every 2 months? I see Marcy with 2. Okay, Yeah, we can definitely do that then. So what I will do is I'm going to go ahead and since I'm recording this, I'm going to make notes from the meeting, highlight the items that were included, the possible discussion points, and then I'll send that out to you all. And just to make sure that I'm capturing what everybody was wanting to address. And then from there, we can go ahead and create our agenda for our next meeting, which would then be in March. Does that sound fair? Okay, great. Okay, well, again, Peggy, thank you so much for saving me. I was a little zoned out listening. Who knew that Commissioner's Court could be so inspiring that I wasn't paying attention with the time? So I apologize for that. But thank you for waiting on me, and I really appreciate it. Is there anything else anyone wants to say before we sign off?
One thing, and again, I'm just coming at this from a reporter, but one thing I'd be really curious about maybe at the next meeting is, I heard particularly in the Tri-County, people were talking about some of these issues around places that were once affordable houses becoming like short-term rentals, for example. I'd be really curious to hear, in terms of some of the leadership out here, if y'all sort of view the problem in terms of like just making there be more housing stock in general, or if part of the solution is, trying to impose more regulations that would, turn some of these short-term rentals back into long-term rentals, or for that matter, at the very least, be keeping additional long-term rentals from becoming short-term rentals. So again, not trying to send you all down too much of a tangent, but I just know that was something I was really curious about when I got on this call. So, and yeah, thanks so much again for including me.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, we can definitely put that as one of the discussion points. And I know that Marfa has been working really hard on identifying what their ordinance is going to be for those short-term rentals. And so this is something that I'm sure you'll have an answer for from some of the entities, but we can put that on our list as well. Okay, well, thank you all. I appreciate it again. Thank you. I know that this is already going into your lunch. Or 10 minutes before, so I'll let you get to it. So thank you. Good seeing you, Mr. Street. I know you were good seeing you. Okay, well, thank you guys, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.